This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Hottest 100 Australian songs. Emerald Moon, go. I've got the correct list here in front of me.
You've got the correct
compared
list.
to your answers.
Well,
yes.
my list is wrong because,
Okay.
can I be honest? Like, I know this list, Mr. Albanese, our Prime Minister, who's outlined the state-sanctioned Australian top 10 songs ever.
Yes.
I know that these are like acceptable Australian classic songs and bands, right? Like I recognize the names, but I'm going to be honest. This is one area of music that clearly it's just not my vibe, not what I would listen to.
The genre of songs here or just Australian songs? You just had Australian.
I feel like this is like a genre, right? This is like, is this what pub rock is? Is this what people mean when they say pub rock? Because like I like Flame Trees.
Yes.
I like that one.
Yep.
But I think what it is, sorry, we're going to go on a tangent. I don't know, the tweet itself is funny, but just very quickly, like I feel like everyone else grew up listening, like with their parents listening to these songs. The only one in here that my parents were listening to was Paul Kelly. My dad listened to a lot of Paul Kelly.
Of course.
But yeah, that's it.
It's for a guy who's like so cool and supposed to be into like cool, interesting music and DJs. It's a pretty basic ass bitch list. Angels, am I ever going to see your face again? No way. Get fucked, fuck off. Cheeky. Cold Chisel.
Oh, is that what that is?
That's what that one is. Cold Chisel.
Okay, because I was going to say I could not sing the chorus. Go on.
Yeah.
Cold Chisel, Flame Trees.
The Foves, Dogs Are the Best People, The Go-Betweens, Cattle and Cane, You Are My Purple Sneakers, Hunters and Collectors, Throw Your Arms Around Me, wonderful song. The Triffids, Wide Open Road, Spider Bait, Buy Me a Pony, Midnight Oil, Beds Are Burning, Paul Kelly, How to Make Rape.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure.
No women on vocals there. There's some women in those bands, but no women on the mic.
A little bit misogynist. I'm just going to say it. You think that Albanese actually wrote this list though, and I don't know who is being more cynical with that. Where you're like, you think that he's actually this lame, and I'm like, yeah, I think he's lame, but I reckon this is the result of like a concerted meeting of some of the top paid policy advisors, strategists in the country being like, what is the most middle of the road acceptable mainstream Australia centrist list that we can do here for you?
Quick, we're supporting illegal missile strikes on Iran. Think of something. Think of something to post.
Think of something relatable. Yeah, and I reckon like there were probably things that Albanese might have suggested or that someone brought up in that room and they were like struck off the list for the funniest reasons. I just think there was a very funny process that went into this and it would make a good episode of Utopia or, The Hollow Men or something like that.
Right, talking through it. Again, I'm sure he's done this before and posting your list, this is a common thing. Double J is running this Hottest 100 of Australian songs thing at the moment, so lots of people are posting their lists out and about. And again, I'm sure that Albanese is basic enough to list all these particular songs. That's perfectly fine. But
what's on your list?
I posted my list. I had Christine Arnoux Party, which I thought was funny. And I don't know, just lots of my gay shit that I like. Darren Hanlon, I Wish That I Was Beautiful for You. What else? I wrote the list somewhere.
It does make me want to...
What's your number one?
My number one, yeah. See, what I think is a travesty is that there's no fucking Silverchair on here. Silverchair, one of the best bands of all time.
Right.
Australian band, bloody incredible. Like... you'd think it'd be Tomorrow. I also like Israel's Son. Anyway, but that would be in there. It does make me want to go and do my own list. But seeing the way that people reacted to Albanese's, I don't know if I'd be posting it anywhere.
All right, so this is what I have a glimmer of sympathy of. Just like, if you're a high-profile politician, if you're the Prime Minister, why post anything? Because I'm sure he doesn't read the comments, but the replies include things like, mate, we need a Prime Minister, not a soy-drinking, whining, woke climate crisis activist doing work experience at Triple J. Slam.
Wait. Oh, so it's the wokeness is just engaging with the ABC. Is that?
I guess so.
Yeah, gotcha.
Liking music is woke and bad. Thomas says, not the list a straight man would make.
It seems like the straightest list of all, but okay.
Pretty straight. Stick this rubbish and increase defence spending, says Sean McLeod, libertarian. Fantastic. How does this help Aussies who are struggling to make ends meet whilst you send billions to Ukraine? Pretty good.
I mean,
Nick Shadegg, who's always shitposting, he said, never heard of those bands, sorry, which I enjoyed. And Billy replied, I didn't think you'd listen to Australian music, Albo, just Islamic call to prayer.
so true. So true. Wow. Got him.
So he should have got Israel Sun in there and, to shore up the base.
That's right. People would have been like, yeah, nice.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
She has described the Greens as very, very dangerous. I agree.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Alrighty, everyone. Well, it's the top #1 podcast of Australian history ever, as determined by Triple J and officially sanctioned by the Prime Minister of Australia. Serious danger.
Yay.
This is a podcast about green politics in Australia. This is not an official Greens Party podcast. Fuck off. No, fuck off, fuck you, whatever it is. It never will be. Like the song. This podcast is produced by Michael the Griffin. I'm Emerald Moon. That's Tom Ballard. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Emerald. Lovely to be back. Thanks for covering for me last week. Excited about this week's episode. We're going to be wrapping up all the wild stories swirling around the right to protest for Palestine while it's still legal, including a very bad thing that happened to our Greens comrade Hannah Thomas last week. And we're going to be joined by Greens Senator Steph Hodgins-May to discuss all things childcare. Again, horrible story around the childcare industry in Australia this week. We want to talk about that, but more broadly, what's wrong with the childcare industry in Australia and what the Greens want to do to try and fix it.
Quite a few things, it seems.
Oh, great. Good news. Big thanks to our patrons for supporting the show. For just $3 a month, you get bonus content. Thanks to James, LLW, Helen, and Kiralee. The latest Patreon episode is from our live show in Meanjin, Brisbane, with us taking a deep dive into the incredible Queensland political institution that is Pauline Hanson's One Nation. That's you. That's who you are. And we talked about that at length.
That's me. That's me. Put Pauline on the team.
I reckon.
Like, let's put her on for game 3.
After the election, as I was sort of sifting through all the various analysis of the results, I discovered a podcast called Serious Danger with Emerald Moon and Tom Ballard. Tom Ballard, you might know, is someone who has pioneered a career as being a comedian who's not funny. And as far as I can tell, has got by in life on a retainer from the ABC. But this is a cheer squad podcast for the Greens. And if you want to watch Green Pain live, I commend it to you. So after watching a couple of episodes, just to sort of indulge and in their pain and grief, in what is clearly a sort of borderline psychotic behaviour on my part, I stumbled across the podcast they did in the immediate aftermath of Senator Karma's defection, and they went bananas.
So you're happy with this as psychological warfare?
Vitriolic. They were vitriolic. They were angry, like all of they tried to, they turned themselves into rubber people by trying to explain how this was completely different to other defections, because as opposed to Labor defections out of the Labor Party, this was a defection to the Labor Party, and that makes it completely different. And so different rules should apply. And it was just nonsensical, but they were so angry. And one of the things I particularly enjoyed was that when this podcast, Serious Danger, launched, their very first guest was Senator Karma. So she was the one she was their very first guest, and here she was bookending the career of this short-lived catastrophic podcast by defecting to Labor.
All right, let's talk about the right to protest, for the right for Palestine to exist and not be bombed and not be killed while we still can, while that's still technically legal. A lot of wild stuff happening on this front over the past week. Some of it has been very, very bad. Some of it is kind of good, ? And we'll get to it.
Okay.
We'll start with this story from last week. Police have charged a former Greens candidate after she was hospitalised with injuries she received while being arrested at a pro-Palestinian protest. Hannah Thomas, who challenged Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in the federal seat of Grainla at the May election, was among protesters outside a manufacturing facility in Sydney's southwest on Friday morning. The protesters allege SEC plating supplies components used in the manufacture of F-35 jets, the class of jets flown by the Israeli Defense Forces, an allegation the company has denied. New South Wales Police said officers attempted to move the group of protesters on, claiming the action was unauthorised. Videos showed a woman being dragged away from a group of protesters before falling to the ground with a police officer. Police can be heard saying, "Get up now," and the woman replying, "I'm trying." Ms. Thomas, 35, remains in hospital with significant facial injuries, and her lawyer, Peter O'Brien, has warned that she could lose her eye after the incident. You posted the photo of Hannah Thomas that people might have seen doing the rounds all over the media in a little group chat, I think saying deeply fucked, which it totally was. What have you been thinking as you saw this story break last week?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did think what I think we'll get to later, which Hannah Thomas pointed out, that you immediately are like, this person, it's pretty clear if they are unarmed, like not a threat to anyone, like quite a small woman. And yeah, it's definitely one of the most brutal injuries I've seen at a protest. And but the funny thing is, well, it's not funny at all, actually. When I first saw the photo pop up on my stories, you're scrolling through quickly, and I saw like injured woman, and I was like, oh, another photo of someone who's been bombed in Palestine.
Right.
Just just the fact, the irony of that was, I'm just so used to seeing that in my feed, and I was like, yep, that's what that is. And then I was like, wait, this person registers, I know that face, and realized that, it was Hannah.
It's so intense, isn't it? And the eye is so swollen up and sort of like
streaming blood.
Sort of,
it's
streaming blood caked all over her face.
Yeah.
Really intense. And I mean, yes, obviously nothing but love and solidarity to Hannah, and we're thinking of her at this very difficult time. We're sort of a week on now, and I don't have a particular update in terms of the medical front as to the likelihood of her losing vision in that eye. Regardless, it's deeply traumatic and fucking disgusting, completely unnecessary. Right?
Yeah.
The cops' initial response was basically like, yep, we've nailed it here, actually. Nothing to see here, no problems
this is good
whatsoever.
and fine. Don't worry. Yeah. Why are you guys even talking about this? Insane. Hey, what did they say? They were like, no, nothing I've seen that indicates misconduct. They were like, not a critical incident. We won't investigate it.
I've had a preliminary review of the body-worn video. This is Brett McFadden, the New South Wales Assistant Police Commissioner. There's no information at this stage that's before me that indicates any misconduct on behalf of my officers. Okay. So she was given a move-on direction. Allegedly, she failed to comply with that. Attempts were made to arrest her. She resisted, and then others became involved. A scuffle ensued. A scuffle. A harmless little scuffle.
Yeah, just a scuffle. Yeah. Between like an armed or probably multiple armed officers. I haven't seen video.
Yes.
Anyway, fucking whatever.
No allegation that this protest was anything other than peaceful. Okay, so again, just another example of the cops really de-escalating a situation. A perfectly peaceful protest that then results in a woman losing her eye, and cops have done their job.
Thank God they were there to protect us. What might have happened if the cops weren't there?
It's so crazy to look at this result and think, no, that's worth it. That cost of a woman potentially losing the vision for the rest of her life is absolutely worth the goal of getting people to comply with a move-on order as they engage in peaceful protest in the cause of trying to stop a genocide. Like this all works out fantastic. We've done a really good job here.
Yeah, job well done.
Yeah, so initially he's like, this is not I'm happy for it not to be declared a critical incident. A critical incident is something, if a injury is of a certain seriousness, that triggers an investigation. He said, based on the evidence that we have thus far, I'm happy not calling it a critical incident. Basically, he's like, we haven't got the medical records yet. We need to get the medical information to determine whether or not it's serious enough.
Who can say? Well, as if he wouldn't have seen the photo. Who can say whether it's? I don't know. I'd have to be a doctor to determine whether this.
I'm not a doctor.
Is represents a serious injury. Fuck off.
Yeah, I'm not a climate scientist or a doctor. Who knows?
Yeah.
The New South Wales Police Medical Officer has since determined that the level of injury does warrant a critical incident declaration. So that investigation will now be triggered. It'll be conducted by the Campbelltown City Police Area Command, which will be reviewed by the Professional Standards Command and overseen by the Law Enforcement Conduct Committee.
Okay.
Obviously, people express concerns about cops interviewing cops. The Law Enforcement Conduct Committee. This is like professional standards kind of vibe. Have you got much hope for this securing justice or giving us a good idea of what actually happened?
This is what I was trying. I actually was having to do a little bit of reading into how New South Wales system works, because I know in Queensland it's just cops investigating cops. They have the quote ethical standards unit that's just cops, and the Corruption Commission can can review it if it's referred to them, but there's no independent police integrity unit. And it seems like New South Wales is slightly better, but the fact that the actual nuts and bolts of the investigation are still being run by cops doesn't give me great hope. No.
But also that initial response to, like, straight out of the gate in the media, we know this looks bad because there's been terrible photos of this tiny woman with this horrific injury, after a peaceful protest. But the immediate reaction is to go into PR mode, crisis mode, deny, say everything here is fine, where the cops trust us, everything's no worries. Like that from the Assistant Police Commissioner, like that gives you a good example of where the institution as a whole, where their kind of starting point is.
That's how cops work. Yeah.
Hannah's statement I thought was pretty remarkable, and people might have seen a video that she posted to Instagram here discussing this. Let's hear a little taste of that now.
Hi, I just wanted to jump on and say thanks so much for all the support. I've received an overwhelming amount of messages in the last few days, and they've meant a lot to me, so thank you. I've been very lucky to have been looked after so well at Bankstown Hospital. The doctors and nurses have been absolutely amazing, as were the paramedics who brought me here. I don't want to get into too much detail about the traumatic events on Friday, but I'm 5'1", I weigh about 45 kilos. I was engaged in peaceful protest, and my interactions with New South Wales police have left me potentially without vision in my right eye permanently. I look like this now because of Chris Minns and Yasmin Catley and their draconian anti-protest laws and their attempts to demonize protesters, especially protesters for Palestine. They've emboldened the police to crack down with extreme violence and brutality, and they were warned that those laws would lead to this outcome. I just want to finish by saying what I've gone through is obviously nothing compared to what people in Gaza are going through because of Israel. Children being amputated, going through amputations without anesthetics, people having to choose between starving to death or getting shot, lining up for food. That's happening right now, and that's why we protested on Friday, and that's why we'll keep protesting.
Ms. Thomas said that what she was going through was obviously nothing compared to what people in Gaza are going through because of Israel. That's why we protested on Friday, and that's why we'll keep protesting. I mean, pretty fucking amazing. And again, even to be sitting there in hospital with your eye, in the state that it was, to sort of say, this is bad, this is nothing compared to what innocent Palestinians are dealing with on a day-to-day basis as they face this genocidal war. She's a fucking hero in my book.
That was a pretty incredible statement. And I know it went pretty viral. I think it got international attention as well. It was shared around quite a bit because, everything that she says is fucking correct. And she brings it back to the moral imperative that she had that motivated her to attend a peaceful protest.
Yes.
So, I take my hat off to her.
What do you think of her sort of laying the blame at the feet of Minns and the New South Wales Police Minister, Yasmin Catley, and the recent crackdown on protests, the draconian anti-protest legislation that the Labor government has introduced this year? She sort of says this is what happened, right? This has fostered this kind of environment where these kind of outcomes are inevitable. What do you make of that?
I think it's an important point to make, because I think that even if and when the police ever, or even just like mainstream Australia, accepts that there's been police misconduct, then the tendency is to say it's a bad apple, or it's just one instance of that officer acting poorly, which is why I think it's important to remind everybody that this is not an aberration. This is an example of police, like the system does what is it? The quote, the purpose of a system is what it does. And this is the police working as intended, and the police are enforcing the laws and the objectives of the state. And so, yes, the state government is absolutely to blame. They empower the police to act in this way. And time and again, they excuse violent and corrupt behavior on the part of police. They protect them. They increase their powers with no oversight. Whatever the police ask for, they get it. And the state government has made it quite clear that that includes, quote unquote, cracking down on peaceful protesters.
Yeah. We've had that from the federal ministers as well. Tony Burke, Home Affairs Minister, was on Sky News. He expressed some sympathy towards Thomas' injuries, but took a similar line to McFadden, the commissioner. When people were asked to move on by the police, they should have followed the police direction. Apparently, they didn't. The issue of the injury will be dealt with by the police review, but for anyone wanting to have a protest, no one's above the law. Now, I'm an idiot because I saw a headline that said Tony Burke, in relation to this protest, no one's above the law. And I thought, oh, cool. Tony Burke is saying, yes, there should be accountability for this incident. And no one, including the police, are above the law.
Oh, Tom.
And there I know, I'm dumb in the head.
No one's above the law except the police.
He meant, fuck this lady, fuck this former Greens candidate. Yeah. And she got exactly what she deserved. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. That tone
what did you think of those comments from Burke?
It's unfortunate. It's always that thing, isn't it? It's unfortunate that they were injured. I mean, and it's the same fucking way that they approach Palestine, isn't it? Oh, it's unfortunate that children are having limbs amputated without anesthetic. It's really horrible that civilians are being killed en masse. But, Israel has a right
they
to
should
defend
follow
itself.
that move on order from Israel. They really should move on from Gaza. And how do these people? Is it crazy to assume that like every Labor MP has at some point attended a protest in some way? Like maybe
Depends
maybe there
were
some federal Labor MPs.
Like,
yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah,
right.
I mean, they must have. They've stood around while people give speeches. I'm sure.
Sure.
Or they've walked down the street on Labor Day. But yeah, like, I don't know how many. Sure, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they haven't been to actual protests, and they haven't been to protests where police are acting as they do at a protest that genuinely threatens the status quo. And I think anyone who has been to a protest where police, where it's genuinely, like I said, threatening the status quo, and like the way that police act, it's a really. It is a radicalizing moment, and if it doesn't radicalize you to watch police arresting protesters or or kettling protesters or whatever, then like what the fuck is wrong with you? Because it's one of the most viscerally, like, those are moments I can still see and feel those moments that I've had when I've been in contact with cops at protests and watching others. Like, it sticks with you and it makes you see things very differently.
I mean, yeah, but like, how do they reckon that? I mean, the disdain that they have for protesters is pretty apparent all the time too, isn't it? I mean, the way they describe the Greens as the party of protest, like the way they say that with poison. But yeah, I mean, even though we have footage of like Anthony Albanese at Palestine protest on the street, presumably they've taken part or lends support or solidarity to strikes at some point, but they just have so little regard for anybody who might put their bodies on that line, as Hannah Thomas clearly has here in this particular instance, for their principles and their values out on the street. That's like wrong. That's not the way to do it. And whatever happens to you, well, that's your own fault.
Well, and even strikes, it's all about you have to follow the rules. If it's not protected industrial action, within these really strictly defined parameters, then Labor's not on board. And the same goes for protests. If it's not an authorised protest, which basically just means you can walk down the street and ask nicely for maybe things to change, then it's not legitimate.
But and it's also, it's like, the move on order, like as if that is more important than refraining from taking someone's vision away for the rest of their life. Like, wouldn't you compare those two things and be like, what was the police trying to achieve here? Is that goal, was anyone else's safety actually in danger until the cops came up and told these people to move on? No. So, well, I guess this outcome is that, and no one's above the law. The law's the law. And if you lose an eye in the process, too bad. Sorry. Ironically, Hannah Thomas has issued defamation notices to Tony Burke and Sky News for these comments, because when you're saying, some people didn't follow the law, like, that is defamatory, right? Because that has not been proven yet whatsoever. It all needs to be alleged that Hannah Thomas was told to move on and she didn't do that. We still don't have the details of that. That's all up to review. So that's been put out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, even the question about the legality or who was and wasn't following the law in this particular action is very much an open question. First of all, as you mentioned, the idea that this protest was unauthorized is a little bit misleading, okay? The police alleged the protest was unauthorized as those involved had not given advance notice nor submitted a form that protected them from being charged under anti-protest laws. Now, the impression of that, you'd be like, oh, you need to get authorization to have a protest in New South Wales. That is absolutely not the case. You do not need to get authorization in order to have a protest because we don't live in a complete police state in this country. Like, people have absolutely a right to gather publicly and protest peacefully in the public. If you go through the Form 1 protest process, rather, if you do a Form 1 protest, that means that you are protected from being charged by the police. If you submit the form, the police approves of the protest that you're submitting, then during that protest, you are protected from being arrested and certain charges can be applied to you.
You're not totally protected from being arrested. That would be nice. Sure. But yes, certain protections apply.
Right, which is what we saw with the Rising Tide protest in the Newcastle port, right? Like, went through this big process, applied for the Form 1, didn't get it, went ahead with the protest anyway, and that's what gave the police the powers to then start arresting people out of the kayaks.
Yeah.
But yeah, as still not great, but at least that distinction is very important. And Sue Higginson, friend of the show, New South Wales Greens MLC, it concerns me deeply that the police, in announcing the critical incident, have referred to the protest at Belmore as unauthorised. This is another falsehood that is created by the current regime of intolerance by Premier Chris Minns and the police. It's important to remember people do not need authorisation to hold a protest. To do so would mean we really do live in a police state.
But this is the problem, because our laws contain so many opportunities, so much is left to police discretion. And particularly, every time you see a broadening of police powers, any element in there that is left up to police discretion is effectively just giving them carte blanche to it's like a foot in the door where they can go, oh, here's this one section in the law that gives me discretion to say that I can issue this order or whatever, which then if they don't comply, I can arrest them. And then what happens is then they've got that foot in the door and they can pile on 10 other offences because then you're obstructing police and then you rolled your eyes at me, you're assaulting an officer. Like, it's and then on the way to the cop shop, then you can rack up another bunch of offences. Like, I think this is the thing that maybe people who don't have much interaction or don't have people who have had much interaction with law enforcement don't quite realise how the system works, that they just need one foot in and you end up with 10 charges. And that is the way that police work.
Well, I'll tell you who also doesn't know how the law works. The fucking police, okay? This is from the ABC about this protest. New video of the event shows a protester being grabbed after questioning what legislation officers were citing to issue move-on orders. The video shows police telling the protesters they were being issued a move-on order, but failing to provide them with details, simply saying they needed to leave the suburb of Belmore for 24 hours. I don't think you can do that.
Yeah.
You're making shit up, one protester said. If you're not educated, go read something, the male officer responded. What? I'm sorry, what? First of all, no cop should be lecturing anyone on reading more. I'm sorry. But what the hell are you talking about? You should be able to cite the legislation and explain it to us. Thank you. Activist Zach Schofield from the Rising Tide World asked police to cite the legislation that empowers officers to issue move-on orders. Can you name it, please? Because this is actually counter to LEPRA, the Law Enforcement Powers and Responsibilities Act. Again, protesters who are just in Section 4B.
I imagine that's very annoying if you're a cop.
Yes. These fucking citizens knowing their rights. In response, he said, so you can name the legislation. In response, the male officer grabbed Schofield by the upper arm, pulling him away. A scuffle broke out between protesters and officers.
Love a scuffle. Yeah.
It just broke out spontaneously after being asked to cite the legislation he was operating under. A cop grabs a protester by the arm and then just scuffle happens.
Yeah.
It's sort of crazy.
So because and I don't know if you were going to get to this, but in terms of whether it was legal, right? What powers they were using to tell people to leave the suburb. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know about the leaving for 24 hours thing, but this is this really rubbery up to discretion thing around move-on orders where police still aren't meant to issue a move on order. The way the law is written, like from my understanding, they're not meant to issue a move on direction if you are hosting a legitimate protest, like a reasonable person would think that you're doing a legitimate protest in a public space, even if it's not quote unquote authorized, even if you don't have a Form 1, they're still not meant to do it. If it's a legitimate protest, they can't issue that unless traffic is obstructed or they believe that there's a serious risk to the safety of a person. So if that officer needed to be like, well, there's a serious risk to the safety of this person. And that is where you go back to what serious risk was Hannah Thomas posing in that moment that you needed to issue her with a move on direction and then violently fucking arrest her for allegedly refusing to comply.
Right. So this is where the question is, because the change to the laws earlier in the year introduced by the Minns government in New South Wales, sparked by the fake caravan, the dual caravan, this spate of supposedly anti-Semitic attacks that exposed to be a bunch of bullshit organized by organized crime fuckheads, right? We had this knee-jerk reaction. We passed these laws. These laws are now being there's a review into whether the public was misled while those laws were being passed. There's also a constitutional challenge, I believe, about the legality of those laws. But under those laws, police can issue a move on order if a protest is taking place near a place of worship. Okay. The protest does not need to be directed at the place of worship or even about religion, and the legislation does not define near. That is entirely in the police's discretion.
Jesus fucking Christ. Okay.
Now, the cops are saying that they didn't use that law. Okay, but anyway, that's their option. But then we're also getting information about how SEC plating is over the road from the Tiba Islamic Association mosque. Okay. So again, obviously the initial law was passed to, protect protests happening outside synagogues. We know that there are cases of that were unfortunate and bad. And I think we discussed that on the show previously. There's also concern, of course, because where big protests in the city in Sydney near the town hall happen, there are places of worship nearby. But anyway, that's a side issue. So there's a mosque over the side of the road. Okay. Assistant Commissioner McFadden said New South Wales Police had not used the state government's anti-protest laws in this matter. The move on directions were not related to the new legislation. The reference to the mosque in the arrest documents was related to the use of offensive language in relation to being in a public place by one of the other protesters arrested at the scene. So
What?
I mean, they talk about...
Wait, what does the mosque have to do with...
I guess swearing near a mosque is worse than anywhere else, but it's a fucking mess. It's fucking insane. And then they're citing this place of worship power, and then also they're not citing that as part of the arrest warrant. Like it's a total mess and a bizarre, and just an illustration of how terrible these laws are and how cynical the use of the law to shut down on peaceful, legitimate protest is in New South Wales, with devastating consequences in this case.
Well, and this is the thing, that we've got to the point where the government has expanded police powers so dramatically and on so many occasions and in so many fucking directions and with such a great level of complexity and subjectivity that they don't even fucking know what laws they're using to arrest peaceful protesters and assault them. They can be pretty confident. There'll be one there. Somewhere.
Arrest first, somewhere. Ask questions later. That's how
exactly. Yeah.
Free. Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death to the IDF. 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 Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be free.
So yes, that's the shit show of the Hannah Thomas story. Once again, love and solidarity to Hannah. Thank you for standing up for what you believe in and for standing proud, and we're thinking of you. So you've got that. Then also the bigger conversation about what happened at Glastonbury with Bob Vylan and Kneecap. Did you follow much of this?
No, I've seen the clips and the social posts, but I had not heard of Bob Vylan before this, so
I was not familiar with Bob Vylan, no, but I don't know anyone. I've heard of Kneecap.
Heard of Kneecap, cool. Yes.
So they're already getting investigated for terrorist charges because one of the singers held up a Hezbollah flag at a gig. He's sort of saying he didn't know what it was. He just picked it up on stage. So that was already happening. The BBC said they're not going to broadcast Kneecap's set at Glastonbury. They did broadcast Bob Vylan. This is a punk duo, a punk rap duo from the UK. They expressed support for Palestine. There were Palestine flags everywhere across Glastonbury, of course, and at one point led a chant of death, death to the IDF. Kneecap chanted "fuck Keir Starmer" during their set and suggested they might start a riot outside a British court where one of their members is going to be trialed later on. They kind of walked that back and said, no, we're not going to do a riot. It's all love, just free Palestine. Mm-hmm. As a result, they're both being investigated by the police for those comments. Bob Vylan has been dropped by the management, had their US visa revoked. They were going to tour the US later this year. Wow. That's been revoked for their hateful tirade. And the BBC, the fucking cowards, put out this statement. The BBC respects freedom of expression but stands firmly against incitement to violence. The anti-Semitic sentiments expressed by Bob Vylan were utterly unacceptable and have no place on our airwaves.
Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. How many times do we have to say it? Fuck you, BBC. To just fucking say that as fucking fact every time. I'm so sick of this shit.
It's pretty exhausting. I mean, it triggered this conversation. If you say death to the IDF, are you literally wishing death upon IDF's soldiers? Or I would think a much more reasonable interpretation of those comments is death to this institution, death to this military force that is currently enacting a genocide. Yes, it's inflammatory. Yes,
death
it's hyperbolic. Death to America.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. In that kind of category of things. I mean, people are saying because IDF service is compulsory in Israel and the vast majority of them are Jewish people, therefore it's basically tantamount to saying death to Jews, which is...
But it's not, again, that's the thing. It's not the same as saying death to Jews, actually, because there are many Jews who are not in the IDF.
Yes, there sure is. There are people who actively don't sign up. Yes, and the idea, the idea, the presentation in the UK media from some voices is like being a member of the IDF is a protected characteristic. That's part of an identity.
Yeah, human rights. That's right. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Pretty wild. You also in the UK have the Palestine Action Group being prescribed as a terrorist organization. Okay, now Palestine Action can be found in lots of different countries. In the UK, they broke into an RAF base. They painted some red paint on planes that are used as part of Israel's genocidal war. And this, according to the wonderful progressive Labour government of Keir Starmer, has seen them prescribed as a terrorist organisation, which means expressing any support for Palestine action is technically expressing support for a terrorist organisation.
Cool, because things are just what we say they are.
The truth is dead.
That's democracy.
Those are all very bad things and very troubling and very concerning. But in Australia, on this week, on the flip side, we also had sort of stories of a different hue. An external review into Creative Australia's decision to rescind the offer to Khaled Sabsabi and Michael D'Agostino to be Australia's representatives at the 2026 Biennale in Venice found a series of missteps, assumptions, and missed opportunities led to that decision, and it is now being reversed. It's kind of like, there was no any one person.
A series of unfortunate events. Yeah. Lemony Snickets.
It's a real Lemony Snickets situation.
Yeah.
And anyway, they've reversed that decision, and Sabsabi and D'Agostino have been reinstated as Australia's representatives at the Biennale. So that's something that's good. Also in the federal court, we had a case that found an Islamic preacher was found to have delivered lectures that were fundamentally racist and anti-Semitic. If you look at these lectures, I think it's completely reasonable. He was saying grossly anti-Semitic things that, the idea that you're making those comments from a religious basis don't hold much water for me. They're still totally racist. But the judge also made a very clear distinction between the racist comments about Jewish people that this man made and legitimate criticism of Israel. Specifically in a judgment saying political criticism of Israel, however inflammatory or adversarial, is not by its nature criticism of Jews in general or based on Jewish racial or ethnic identity. The conclusion that it is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel is the corollary of the conclusion that to blame Jews for the actions of Israel is anti-Semitic. One flows from the other.
Great. Good to have that.
Pretty good. Yes.
like in common law. Does that form part of common law? Yeah.
Yes, just have that precedent set and,
Not a lawyer,
a sober
sorry.
judge looking at this and playing out the thing that we all know is true, the thing that's been driving us crazy, we've been trying to bang on about over the past 22 months, but a very important thing sort of articulated there, which is important to make that distinction.
Yeah.
That was good to see. And we had the verdict in the Antoinette Lattouf case, in which the ABC was found to have unlawfully terminated her employment because of her political opinion and because senior figures at the ABC capitulated to a lobbying effort from pro-Israel lobbyists, including lawyers, and they decided to punish Antoinette Lattouf, who did absolutely nothing wrong. Clap there. Did you follow much of the details of the case, or the sort of ins and outs?
I actually didn't, to be honest. But then I've been following a little bit of her new kind of media company, it seems, that she's starting. I don't know if it's just her, or if it's her and Jan Fran, but posting excerpts from the case. And yeah, some of the emails from, is it Ida Buttrose?
Yeah,
the ABC chair, like, it's real. It's like Devil Wears Prada shit. Like, she just seems like an evil boss. Is that sexist of me to say, actually? I don't know. Anyway, that's, maybe I'm typecasting.
No,
But she just
comparing her
seems
to her
evil.
CEO. She probably was a bit Devil's Wear Prada when she worked at, was it Clio? Is it where she was? Yes, emails like, can't she just get COVID? We owe her nothing. Like, these are phrases of just like her absolute disdain for this person who works at the ABC, the institution that you're the chair of.
I'm sick of receiving, of getting emails about her. And then she gets an email from the Zionist lobby, like fawning over the decision to fire her. And she's like, it's so nice to get praise, just by the way.
We love hearing from our listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd really recommend people listen. Antoinette has just put out a podcast this week with Jan Fran. The show's called We Used to Be Journos. The first episode is them talking at length about the ins and outs of the case. Fascinating. And I followed it kind of closely, but like just some stuff that came through that really surprised me. First of all, I didn't. My understanding was that she was, the whole furor kicked off when she shared this post from the Human Rights Watch about Israel using starvation as a weapon of war. That's not true. She was identified as a target before that when she co-wrote a piece with Cam Wilson for Crikey about the legitimacy of the video of people chanting "Gas the Jews"
We spoke about that on the show. Yeah.
On the steps of the Sydney Opera House. Again, people definitely did chant that. The numbers of people who did that was grossly exaggerated, and legitimacy of the footage that went viral and was doing the rounds had been doctored. That footage had been doctored. We figured that out. So she co-writes that piece. She gets identified as a target by these particular lobbyists. And then as soon as she starts this 5-day casual contract on local ABC, talking about absolute fluff and nothing of political or anything relating to the Middle East, regardless of that, people are, starting this campaign to try and get her fired from the outset. I also didn't know the ABC hired a union-busting American firm to be their lawyers in this case, lawyers which used Antoinette's previous acknowledgement of her mental health issues to discredit her and literally putting her on the stand and sort of saying, are you a bit crazy? Because you seem kind of crazy. And remember when you talked about being crazy? David Anderson, the former managing director of the ABC, said that Antoinette Lattouf's social media was filled with anti-Semitic hatred. He was asked to cite an example. He couldn't name one. And eventually they came to the point in the case where he said, the illegal occupation of Palestine.
That's
a reference to the illegal occupation is anti-Semitic. He said, I think it can be regarded as anti-Semitic, yes.
That's
crazy. Now,
wow. That's one of the longest bows I've seen drawn. That's incredible.
The ABC shared that Human Rights Watch post twice. They reported on it before Antoinette posted it on her actual social media. So incredible. And of course, we've heard about the bill. This has cost at least $2 million, they reckon, in legal fees. Antoinette Lattouf earlier on said, I will happily settle for a smaller amount of money. All I want is a few more shifts that I was denied and an apology from the ABC. And the ABC said, absolutely not. We will pursue this to the end. It's cost
$2 million.
$2 million.
Could have gone to Jobs for Tom, Think about really think about it, guys.
That's how I earn a living, because I'm not a funny comedian, according to David Feeney. And so I only subsist on ABC projects, as we all know. Anyway, I think lots of people saying, well, this was always going to happen. The ABC is just like completely disgrace themselves here, take a real hit to their reputation. This never should have happened. So I don't know, those three stories in succession this week.
Yeah.
Tied in with Zoran Mamdani's victory in the US, people are saying this is evidence that perhaps this tactic is wearing thin. Perhaps the reality of what is happening in Gaza is just too powerful to be denied, to be distracted from by these very bad faith allegations and these completely ignorant ideas about certain people's anti-Semitism, when all people are doing is criticizing Israel and calling out what's happening before their eyes.
Yeah, I think potentially it's like, yes, maybe the tide is turning and that is something positive, but the cynic or whatever in me says that we've kind of always known, we've always said that there will be a moment in history where the world looks back upon this period and looks back upon Israel's genocide in Gaza and recognizes it as such. And there will be people who were on the right side of history and those who were on the wrong side of history, but everyone will pretend, just like after the Holocaust, everyone will pretend that, they didn't support the Nazis. And I think it's becoming, less socially acceptable. But you know what? Like the death, the destruction, the genocide will still have happened.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think it will be too late.
Yes, and we take no pleasure in the idea that, yes, this vindication comes at the cost of, yes, an ongoing genocide. And again, the stories coming out at the moment of just dozens and dozens of Palestinian people being killed as they're lining up for aid, being shot down by the IDF on a regular basis. Like, fucking disgusting. But
yeah, we've already sent them the weapons. We can give back the arts awards and that's nice. And a journalist can be vindicated in court, but yeah, we've already sent the weapons. Thousands and thousands of Palestinians have already been starved and killed. And the IDF has already been given all of the tools and the effective go-ahead from the Western world to carry out and complete their ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza.
Yes. If only anything, if you take anything from these stories, just remember that you are right. What you are saying is correct, and you've got to stand by your principles and hopefully be inspired by the example of Hannah Thomas, of Kneecap, of Antoinette Lattouf, who has sort of said, no, fuck this. No, this is absolutely the right thing to do, and even if it comes at a personal cost, I'm going to stand by that principle because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
If the public had even the slightest idea of how horrendous these incidents are in a lot of these centres, there would be an absolute uproar. And they don't want to have to deal with that. They don't want to have to deal with the angry parents wanting to know why they weren't told earlier that these things were happening at the places they're leaving their children.
New South Wales Greens politician Abigail Boyd has been working with Four Corners for the last 6 months. The former corporate lawyer is helping us expose what's really going on inside childcare. What's the biggest revelation to you?
Just how much is being kept a secret. This is not just a whole sector that wants to hide this from the public. It's also the regulator. It's the government that are pumping so much money into this sector. Nobody wants people to know what's actually going on.
Our guest today, Steph Hodgins-May, is a Greens senator for Victoria and the Greens spokesperson for early childhood education, among other things, and friend of the show, Serious Danger. Welcome back, Steph.
Yay.
Thank you for having me back on the show.
Always lovely to have you.
Lovely to see you, Steph.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, obviously better circumstances based on the news of this week. We are going to have a chat about that, and we should just flag at the top that, yes, we would like to issue a trigger warning if obviously the news in the headlines being made this week about abuse, if that is triggering for you. Maybe this is not the interview for you, but we wanted to put that out there before we jump into this conversation. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, we're going to try not to dig too deeply into the horrific kind of the details of the allegations and talk more systemic, but it is pretty horrific. So feel free to skip the rest of this episode if you like and just go read about the Greens' plans to fix childcare. But otherwise, should we get into it? Let's do it. So on Tuesday this week, news broke basically that a childcare centre worker who had worked at about 20 centres in Victoria had been arrested on over 70 charges of child sex abuse. About 2,600 families had to be informed, and perhaps one of the most shocking details is the fact that around 1,200 children have been recommended, well, their parents have been recommended that they test them potentially for sexually transmitted diseases. This came, I believe, after, I don't know exactly when the arrests were made, but this came after a suppression order was lifted. So you obviously, being in Victoria, and this is a space you've been working in for a little while, Steph, have you heard directly from any of the parents, or kind of been talking to any of the parents who received one of those texts who've been kind of affected by this week?
Yeah, look, just to acknowledge such a devastating set of circumstances, and our hearts go out to those families impacted, the children, the educators who have been working in these centres and who must be feeling such an enormous amount of anxiety and stress as well. I've got a young child care age daughter myself, and I know as someone not implicated, still the feelings of dropping her off in the morning, and you drop them off and hope and expect that this is a place where they're protected, where they're educated, where they're nurtured, and it's just deeply distressing. So I just want to send my love to those families, but to also all people who are grappling with this really horrific news. And look, whilst this is a particularly heinous set of circumstances, we do know that this is an ongoing trend and is happening right across the country, and multiple abuse allegations coming out daily. So it's quite systemic. But I haven't heard from parents of these particular centres, although I have people in my network have been sort of having to have calls with the centres to find out some of the timelines to see if their children might have been implicated or not. But I'm certainly getting calls from really concerned families who are in circumstances where their centres are currently not for profit, and they're sort of fighting these battles to keep them that way rather than transitioning to for profit. Because this has triggered a lot of fear, I think, around not just these immediate circumstances, but what laid the groundwork for something like this to potentially occur.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk more, kind of return in a little bit to that for-profit versus non-profit childcare centres in a little bit. But I think what you're talking about, the fact that this is a really heinous set of circumstances, or particularly heinous story, but there are a lot of people who would probably say, I mean, we could have told you that it was only a matter of time until we had a story break like this. The writing's been on the wall for some time. Is that kind of your view as well?
Yeah, well, look, we had the Four Corners expose of what happened in New South Wales, and my colleague Abigail Boyd, a Greens Member of Parliament in New South Wales, worked with Adele Ferguson from the ABC to reveal wide-reaching abuse, neglect happening in New South Wales centres through sort of the order of production of documents in that state. And so this was only a few months ago. And I think anyone who thought that this was confined to New South Wales would be particularly naive to believe that was the case. And so my state colleague Anna Sina has recently asked the Victorian state government to release documents that might show the kind of scale and severity of abuse and neglect and issues around safety in Victoria. Those documents haven't been released yet, but we are really, really hoping and urging the government to do that, because we just don't have a full picture of what's happening, but we're getting these piecemeal information coming out of the states. And it would be naive to think that these circumstances are isolated. And it's just such a shame that we see this big flurry of media and, government response only when something this utterly devastating is revealed. And, the advocates in the sector have been crying out for change and have been crying out for more attention to be paid to quality and safety within childcare. And look, the Prime Minister has said that he's kind of focused on affordability, and of course that's a massive issue. Childcare is incredibly unaffordable. Our educators are underpaid, terrible conditions. But that quality aspect has really fallen by the wayside. And so the flags, the alarm was set off a long time ago, and it's just so disappointing. We have to wait till critical point to hear some movement. But frankly, the movement that we're hearing, and maybe you're going to get to this, sorry, but is that it's this sort of band-aids, state by state more like a review at a state level to tell us, I think, what we already know. And that's why the Greens yesterday reaffirmed our calls for a national regulator, like a national watchdog with teeth, to actually start to monitor more closely and enforce those quality standards that exist but just simply aren't enforced, and to really pave a way towards a system that ultimately won't prioritise profit over the safety and well-being of our kids.
Can you just sort of tease that one out a little bit for us, Steph? Because
Yeah.
I think most people could understand, okay, for-profit system means that to make as much money as possible when it comes to shitty services or shitty food, they're going to the neglect that you kind of mentioned, the idea that private companies would prioritise making profits over the welfare of children is one thing. But in terms of like this particularly horrific case of these alleged child sex abuse charges, what does the model there, the kind of for-profit model, how would that, in your view, lead to a circumstance like this when you've got people who are allegedly abusing children in the system? Can you sort of sketch out a little bit there how you think those kind of conditions that you've criticised could lead to this kind of outcome?
Yeah, well, as you just highlighted, there's a lot of – look, and I want to acknowledge at the outset that a lot of centres are doing incredibly good work and with very limited support, with limited pay going to even like to our educators. So I want to acknowledge there's a lot of really good faith actors in the system. But ultimately, when you have a system that is set up, an education system that's set up for profit, corners get cut. Less trained educators are hired, less emphasis is put on to the kind of education care component, more on how can we increase the revenue for our shareholders. A lot of these are actually owned by offshore corporations. Imagine in our primary and secondary schooling system if this was happening. And I just the Greens have been saying, why on earth is early education, some of the most formative years of a kid's life and brain development. I think 90% of brain development happens in those first kind of 4 or 5 years of a person's life. Why is that treated differently to primary and secondary school, and this sort of racketeering allowed to occur? And so I think it's a combination of cost cutting, of taking shortcuts, but also coupled with, I think, really poor working conditions for our educators. And, you see how many centres this alleged perpetrator worked at in a very short period of time. Why have we got such high turnover of staff in between centres? I feel so lucky. Like when you find a great community-run or council-run childcare centre, which I've been fortunate enough to use, it shouldn't be a privilege, but so many families are on these wait lists that are blowing out, and unfortunately have no choice but to enrol their kid in a for-profit centre. I think more than 70% of the share of early childhood education and care is now for-profit, and we need to be urgently moving in the other direction. We need to be taking care of our educators, giving them conditions. Like teachers get they still could certainly do with a lot stronger conditions, but they things like session planning time to actually these are educators to plan the educational component of the work, proper paying conditions. We saw was it last year, a 15% pay increase for educators, but the government only has set that for 2 years. And so what happens after that? And a lot of centres haven't. It's an opt-in only system, and a lot of centres have been really anxious about opting in because they don't know what happens after 2 years. Will they then have to on-charge the parents to pay for that gap, that extra 15%, or will the government come to the table and make that longer term? But yeah, there are a number of factors that are working together to I suppose, or that aren't keeping our children safe, and work conditions and the for-profit system are really big components of that.
And I think it's such a great point that you make about the gap between how we see primary and secondary schooling, for example, and early childhood education. And it was pointed out, I can't remember who said this in the Four Corners episode, but someone made the point, we don't refer to the primary school industry. Even the very fact that there is a childcare industry should tell us that there's something wrong. And we've really the way that this is funded, the way that this system is structured has made it into a business rather than a system that's set up to provide quality care and education to children. And I think, for me personally, I have to admit, I think it's really only been recently that I've also started to look at this space and go, oh, it's not just about funding. You know, when I would think about Greens policy on childcare and early education, I think, that the point is that it needs to be free and universal, and like that is part of it. But what people are saying is that because we have the childcare subsidy model that is just subsidizing private providers, that actually is kind of attracting people who are, they're not interested in childcare. They're interested in making money. They are businessmen a lot of the time who see this as a great investment opportunity. And you point out, you say, more than 70% of centres are now privately operated. The other thing that the Four Corners episodes pointed out is 95% of new childcare centres in the last decade that have opened are for profit. So clearly the trend is further and further privatisation. And those private centres consistently have lower standards, and they're cutting corners wherever they can and treating their staff like shit a lot of the time because they don't. And then you have the cycle of, the conditions are crap, so people move on. No one wants to work there, which means that there's a greater demand for staff, and these centres are then going to just take on whoever, and they may not be properly qualified. They may not be genuinely, they may not be the people that you want caring for and educating your kids. And I think that's what we're seeing, right?
So, which is exactly the same story that we saw in the aged care sector. It's exactly the same story we saw in the vocational education centre under the Labor government in the Gillard, where they sort of said, hey, private providers, get in on this sweet action. There's shitloads of money to be made, and we don't care if you have no qualifications in this area or no passion for education whatsoever. You can make a shitload of money here, but thanks to the way that the government has sort of arranged this very dodgy market. And surprise, surprise, a whole bunch of very dodgy operators entered that market very quickly to make a shitload of money and screw over a whole bunch of people who just wanted to learn a trade, for God's sake.
And these are vulnerable ends of, life, early childhood and the elderly. And we have called for a royal commission into the early childhood education system. And look, the government's been a bit tricky with their words, saying, we've already had a royal commission. No, we had a royal commission into child sex abuse. We had a royal commission to aged care. We have not had one into the early learning system. And we just think that's a critical way. Look, we know a lot of what can happen right now. And I talked about that national watchdog, the independent watchdog with teeth that actually has the ability to enforce quality standards. Like at the moment, 1 in 9 centres have never been assessed alongside the National Quality Framework. Multiple centres, predominantly for profit, fail their standards, set the rating system each time they're assessed with no consequence. It's we've called for that, but simultaneous to that, we need a royal commission to examine which factors are contributing to these circumstances, the lack of safety within centres, the lack of quality, the lack of affordability, like wide-reaching. But the government has so far refused to do that. And we need to give, I think, educators, we need to give families a platform to talk about some of the issues that they've experienced. But look, we're going to keep pushing for that royal commission, simultaneous to arguing for a national regulator with teeth. Study holders are right behind us in that. I don't think the government for much longer can just do a quick reactive Band-Aid response each time these allegations come forward. So, look, we're trying to keep the pressure on. We did see what happened in aged care. It shouldn't take a royal commission to fix this, but it was kind of like waiting to see what's next. And the Prime Minister said that childcare is going to be one of his legacy pieces that he wants to really focus on. And so we hope that there's an opportunity to work closely with them. We returned to Parliament in about 2.5 weeks and written to the Prime Minister just yesterday saying, come on, let's work together on this. We can get this regulator, this watchdog, whatever you want to call it, done by the end of the year to not only enforce those standards and to be able to shut down the shoddy operators, the people offshore who couldn't give a rat's about our children's safety, but just care about the bottom line. But what it will also do is be responsible for gathering data to show what's working, what's not, and to pave a way towards a genuinely not-for-profit childcare childcare system. So similar to the ACCC, it'll be independent of government, be well-resourced, and we've got a costed plan ready to go. So really hoping to hear back from the PM and to be able to work with Labor through this next term to get it done.
Yeah. And I think, like, to be perfectly honest, people who've listened to this show for a long time know that I personally am a little bit skeptical of royal commissions in general. I think but I look at what the Greens have proposed and a lot of what we do know about this, and to me I can see like there are really concrete steps, like particularly this commission that's about enforcement. It seems like the standards are actually quite good. You know, like we have good standards there. They're just not being enforced. And at the core of all of this is, that profit motive and the privatization of the sector. I guess maybe the justification that I can understand for a royal commission is almost around that like truth-telling element. Like on the one hand, I know Albanese, after the Four Corners episode came out and the Greens were calling for a royal commission, he said something like, he said, I'll find the quote, he said they take years, they cost a lot of money, and you don't need a royal commission to show that what was shown on TV last night was wrong. And like, rare that I would say this, but like I kind of agree with Anthony Albanese that it's like, you don't need a royal commission to know that this is fucking wrong. But I guess I can see an element of giving families an opportunity to speak about, or like to have their experiences examined and kind of shared. Do you think that's one of the key motivators for a royal commission?
Yeah, I think it does provide that platform that's so essential. It does compel witnesses to actually have to provide evidence, which is really challenging under, we'll examine Senate inquiries and what other mechanisms exist to get the information that we need. But at the moment, Victoria is not compelled to reveal its information around reporting of abuse within centres. So sometimes to get the evidence, you actually need that mechanism. But I think truth-telling is an important part of it. What I would say too is that we just don't want to look at each of the issues associated with childcare in isolation. It's not affordability in one component. It's not safety and quality in another, and then accessibility is the other one we haven't talked about today. But they're all so interrelated, and we need to understand which parts are contributing to which in order to have that really comprehensive view of why it's failing. And look, the Productivity Commission report last year was very thorough and did an excellent job, particularly talking about quality. So a lot of what we need to know around quality is there, but it's that extra like foundational level of what's causing it rather than the kind of more band-aid approaches of how to fix it that I think is really important to get to.
Because the Productivity Commission and a Royal Commission is never going to recommend the nationalisation of childcare centres, right? But that political argument, in my view, is the one that we really need to make. And again, it was a deeply unfortunate outcome of the Aged Care Royal Commission is that, like, even though there was a lot of evidence in the course of that commission clearly pointing to the profit motive driving these kind of abuses that everyone was so outraged about, again, they're not going to.
It's an assumption that can't possibly be questioned, though. Like that's just out of the bounds of this. Which is
yes. There's got to be a way to have a wonderful for-profit regulated market that's going to avoid these abuses. Now, I think there's definitely a lane and an important cause for the Greens to keep making that argument, but it's important to recognise that things like royal commissions and the Productivity Commission are not going to recommend the revolution.
Not letting them off the hook just with that. The simultaneous things that you do right now. And, we proposed an end to the CCS in lead up to the election because we recognise that it's not the model. It doesn't work anymore. Number one, it's like it's super cumbersome for families too, like in these punitive activity tests where you've got to do a certain amount of work in order to qualify for your child to be educated in those early years. And we did get a big win on that. We pushed Labor to implement that or to pass that legislation in one of the final sitting weeks of the year when they were trying to hold it out until after the election as a kind of carrot to vote for us. We'll get rid of this activity test, which effectively locks about 130,000 families, disadvantaged kids out of early childhood education every year. So we got that win, and that was great. But the CCS model, it continues to fund these shoddy for-profit operators, and it doesn't address the supply side issues and the accessibility issues of these centres. And we need to invest more fully in childcare. We need to have supply side funding because there are areas where if there aren't as many students that's not profitable to open a centre. There's just these means that no one opens, and there's these childcare deserts that exist, and kids can't even get those opportunities to be educated. So
they fall over, right? Like the ABC Learning scandal. This was a network of for-profit childcare centres. I forget when this was, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that they just fell over, and so he had all these childcare centres closing down, and parents and kids are screwed over left, right, and centre, and are left without a centre, and then to get put on these massive waiting lists for the next best option. Yeah.
And it's happening so frequently, like those kind of shutdowns. But what we're saying is that we think these for-profit providers can't survive in an environment where it is supply-side funding. It's not like direct subsidy to them, and they can't afford to survive. The government should buy them and turn them into government-owned, not-for-profit centres. And because we know that, we can't shut the for-profits down overnight, given how much of the market share they take up, and families need that option. But the government knows the issues, and we need to put in place a plan for them to start taking on those centres that aren't meeting national quality framework, that aren't able to survive in an environment where they're jacking up subsidies and raking in the cash.
Bit of competition. Get a bit of competition out there. Get some competition in this market. Am I right?
I mean, this is something I wondered about, because obviously the federal Labor government has come out this week, and Jason Clare, Education Minister, has said that they're going to introduce fast-tracked legislation when Parliament resumes to address some of these things. So particularly they will be preventing providers that are persistently failing to meet the standards from opening new centres, and they're going to cut off subsidy, the CCS funding, for repeat offender operators, and if they have particularly egregious breaches, as well as some new powers around enforcement, authorised officers being able to enter without AFP there and things like that. But I did kind of think, I think that makes sense. But then what happens if a bunch of childcare centres are shut down because of this? There's a question, like, it's kind of unclear whether that would include, for example, the people who are, or the centres that are working towards standards but not meeting them. That's around 10% apparently of centres at the moment. So that's like that could potentially be huge. And as I understand it, like, it can be very hard to get into childcare centres already. The demand is high in a lot of places. And so do you think, like, is that from the Greens' perspective, is the position going to be on those reforms, like support, but maybe pushing for government acquisition of those centres that will need to close or lose their funding?
Yeah, look, we'll wait till we haven't seen the legislation, so we'll have to have a close look at that. We do, at the outset, feel like it is another Band-Aid response, and if they're already not managing to assess 1 in 9 centres, we haven't got a lot of confidence that assessment and the review of those places is going to, ratchet up very quickly. I don't know if they've got how much funding they're intending to put aside towards these purposes. So this is the circumstance in which we and, a huge number of the sector are pushing for that independent watchdog that sits outside of government to be able to fulfill this role, rather than a sort of parliamentary tweak that, it's a step in the right direction if the shoddy operators are being shut down, sure, but it's not at the same time addressing the root causes of those operators being shoddy. And that's why we think that the watchdog would be able to do those crackdowns, but simultaneous to developing that plan towards genuinely universal, free, high-quality education. So, look, we'll look at the ledge when it comes up, and imagine it'll be a big fortnight when we return. But this will be a priority of the Greens in this parliamentary term, but also this year to try and get this watchdog over the line, to try and get the government to commit to funding the pay rise for educators beyond 2 years. Hugely feminised industry. Can you imagine them going to a male-dominated industry and saying, "Oh, you get a 2-year pay rise," and then who knows? Let's see what happens. Like it just wouldn't happen. But also to address affordability, and that is through removing the CCS and doing supply side funding. And essentially, the point we want to get to, the Greens want to get to, is that you can head to your not-for-profit run local childcare centre, drop your child off, go home and not pay fees and not have to deal with Centrelink and not have to worry that they've been dropped off at a place with inexperienced educators or really high staff turnover, just like you do drop your primary school or secondary school kids off. So that's where we want to get to. Certainly we'll be looking, accessibility is a big part. We've been focused a lot on childcare deserts. So to answer your question more specifically, if we are going to be shutting down centres, of course we need an alternative to make sure that working parents have those real choices around whether they want to, if they want to stay home and care for their children, great. But if they want to have a choice around returning to work, and there's huge boosts to our economic productivity by particularly women being able to return to the workforce. And look, like, when I came into early childhood portfolio, I knew it was important, but I hadn't realised what a great equaliser it is and should be in our society. You can have someone from like huge disadvantage should have the exact same educational opportunities as someone who doesn't. Your postcode shouldn't and often doesn't impact on the level of quality and care you can get. And if you get in those early years and have those interventions with strong, like good, well-trained educators in a really safe and nurturing environment, it can have, life-changing set a kid on a really like positive trajectory in the future. And so it's just so incredibly important. And the fact that it's been monetised just keeps many of us up at night and trying to work out the way to address these issues all simultaneously.
Yeah.
Is that like historically, was that like a massive privatization wave? Because my understanding is like local councils would have normally sort of taken care of this, but has it been previously publicly owned or not-for-profit centres that then became for-profit, or do we have an understanding?
There was a lot of community daycare and, as you said, council-run centres in the past. And look, I probably need to unpack a little more when that big shift towards privatisation happened. But it's an interesting question. We're really also pushing, because in the past and still now, there's a nesting sort of program where early childhood is nested within a school. So those kids receive early education and then just transition straight into the primary school element. And a lot of these cases, there's existing land, there's existing infrastructure to support the extension of early childhood onto the public primary school element. So there are a lot of, I suppose, creative ways that we can look at this. And in really remote parts, it mightn't be that you're going to set up a brand new not-for-profit centre, but there are models of, in parts of remote, I think South Australia, they've got education buses that go around and do that care and provide that educational support to young people and to children. So really, this is another reason why I think a Royal Commission and the watchdog could be really helpful, because they'll be out there really, putting together a roadmap of how we get from where we are now, a pretty broken system, under-recognised staff and unsafe kids, through to the point where it is just like our primary and secondary schooling system.
Yeah. Look, like I said, I'm generally anti-Royal Commission, but I can see when you have such a fundamentally broken system in so many ways such as this, and like that need for, and also, when you have institutions that are effectively gatekeeping the data that we need to really diagnose the problem, as it seems state governments and regulators are doing in particular in this instance. I can see there is a strong argument for that. But there also, as you've said, are things that need to happen, yesterday.
Right now. Yesterday. Years ago.
It's also worth pointing out, it's a bit rich Albanese making that response when they were in favour of the Banking Royal Commission and the Robodebt Royal Commission and the Aged Care Royal Commission. When they're in opposition, suddenly you're in government and you're like, oh no, they're stupid.
It's too expensive. Like this, it's, if you're going to invest however many billions dollars requires that sort of level of investment, you want to get it right. But it also brings about cost savings, as I've mentioned, in terms of productivity down the track. But our model that we propose, we're proposing removing CCS and free early childhood education, but there are other models out there like a $10 a day system that's means tested above $60,000 a year. That's been put forward by a huge number of people in the sector. And, we're open to negotiating. We've said essentially, if we can move towards universal high quality, we're ready to negotiate. So I think it's going to be a priority this term for the government. Like we just need to make sure that the solutions are there. We reckon they are, because I just don't think there's really any more important job than looking out for our kids and creating those really strong foundations as they head into what is a big bad world at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes.
They need to be taught survival skills from the age of 3.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, how to survive the climate wars, what kind of masks to wear during bushfires.
Yeah, in St Kilda in particular, what inundation, storm surge, how do we...
Well, look, thank you, Steph, for coming on to explain all of this on such short notice as well, and I'm sure it's been a very big week. Maybe I'll just ask if there are families or people, like, are there particular resources that you'd point people towards who are, I guess, specifically concerned about the news this week as well, or just looking for resources for things that this coverage and maybe this interview might have brought up?
Yeah, look, the government has released a number of hotlines that families who potentially have been implicated can contact. I'll share those with you. Maybe you can pop it in as a slide in the show.
We'll put them in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And look, our state MP offices, Anasina is our state portfolio holder for this, but if the state MPs are prepared to respond, and of course, contact my office as well. We probably contact us if you've got more questions, I suppose, about what the independent watchdog teeth would operate like. If you've got any thoughts that you'd like to share on the Royal Commission, we can obviously treat any information with full sensitivity. Contact the police and your centre if you've got any specific concerns around, potential abuse within the setting that your children are in. Lifeline, there's a number there. I'll share those with you. But yeah, take care of yourselves and the educators who are working within these centres. That they are on the front line a lot of the time and are experiencing, I think, a lot of stress through this period. Dealing with a lot of anxious parents at drop-off time. So yeah, extend as much kindness and respect as you possibly can to them as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Steph. And we'll see what happens when Parliament goes back. There's a lot to keep our eyes on, I think, when Parliament is back in a couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens then.
Lovely. Thank you for having me on the show to explain what is very close to my heart.
Thanks,
Thank you, Steph Hodgins-May. Thanks for your work.
Pleasure as always.
Thank you, Steph Hodgins-May. Thank you to everyone for listening. Our call to action this week, first of all, we want to acknowledge that it's NAIDOC Week 2025, kicks off today, July the 6th, and goes for a whole week. Solidarity to all our First Nations listeners and the cause of First Nations justice across the board. Was encouraging to see the Europe Commission in Victoria finally hand down its report, acknowledging the thing that First Nations people have known for a very long time, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were subjected to genocide, and the recommendations for trying to make amends for that. But yeah, a truth-telling process, acknowledging the true history of this particular state, a small but important step towards First Nations justice. So I thought that was encouraging.
Yeah. Second call to action is just in relation to Hannah Thomas. She posted on Instagram saying that she's requesting anyone who has kindly offered to send flowers or chip into her legal costs, please consider redirecting their funds to PARA, Addy Road Community Centre, or Redfern Legal Centre's statewide police accountability team. So we will put those in the show notes along with links. Again, what a fucking legend, standing by her values. And yes, please consider chipping into those to support what Hannah was out there protesting for. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. You can support us on Patreon. It's just $3 a month as well to get access to bonus content and help keep the show going. Patreon.com/SeriousDangerAU. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at SeriousDangerAU. You can email us, hello@SeriousDangerPod.com, and you can have a better week than last week, I hope.
Yes, good luck, everyone. Good luck with that.
Serious Danger Australia.